welcome everybody to our nice, this is sort of a, I keep wanting to call it an opening reception, but the exhibit opened 2 months ago, so maybe this is more of a celebratory reception. I want to thank all the students for coming. I see a number of people from town, thank you for coming, and I see a number of people from the university. I should recognize a few of the VIPs here, I think. Thank you, President Seidel, for coming. And I'd like to recognize the new Vice Provost, Dave Bagley, who has just stepped into his job a month ago. He's still alive, despite the firehouse that he's making from. And then there's Christina Kuzmich. Many of you won't recognize her, but she's the power behind Wyoming Public Media. So thank you. The person I want to thank most tonight is Naoma Tate, who has loaned us the paintings that you see in the exhibit on the other side of the hallway over here, and around which we built the exhibit. And we're very excited that she did this. This was an idea that was hatched, I think probably over drinks between Naoma and myself and her friend and colleague, Donna Poulton. And the three of us were like, you know, you've got all these cool pictures here, maybe we could put together a neat exhibit. And we threw out a number of ideas, many of which were really good, but this is the one that stuck. And we're very excited to have been able to borrow the paintings from her. And I'm also very excited that the staff of the Toppan Library, the Toppan Rare Books Library here at the American Heritage Center, sort of rose to the occasion and saw the paintings in a larger context, not just the publications and the illustrations that were made from them, but also saw the connections among the artists and the writers and the connections out into other forms of media. And so we've got a nice little exhibit that we'll be able to talk about. And in addition to the paintings, we were able to draw on a number of our collections here at the American Heritage Center, both in the archive world, but more importantly, at the Toppan Rare Books Library. So I'm very pleased and excited about that. Just a couple of things. We're going to do 2 presentations tonight. We're going to first hear from my colleague, Dr. Mary Beth Brown, who will speak about the exhibit and how they put it together. And then I've signed myself up to talk about one of the paintings by one of the painters, Harvey Dunton, and try to put the painting not into the context of the exhibit, but into the context of his career as an artist and an illustrator. And that'll hopefully give you some perspective on how painters through the 20th century were making a living. And that was very much what was at the core of Harvey Dunton's, shall we say, motivation. His father told him in so many words, you cannot make a living making pretty pictures. And in many ways, he ran away from home at 17 to college and proved him wrong. Became actually he was very able to persuade, to support himself. So I think I will turn the microphone on over to Mary Beth Brown and let her give her presentation. Thank you.
Tin at the top. Hi everyone. Can you all hear me? Because I don't really have a voice. So I kind of sound like Kermit the Frog. Okay, I'm going to start. I'm Dr. Mary Beth Brown, and I'm the Toppan Rare Book Library and curator person. And before we start, I'm just going to give a few shout outs to some people. Emma, they're going to wave, but now they're way in the back, so you can't really see them. So Emma Comstock and Marcus Holscher, they both work with me at Toppan and were really instrumental in doing this exhibit. And then so was Laurel Carr. She's back there too. She's our part-time student, so she's actually getting a business degree, but we convinced her to do stuff with her minor that's our kind of stuff. And then Brittany, Erin, Jess, Marty, and Grace, and Jenny, thank you. They helped us with random things here and there, mainly just being extra hands. And I pay people in cupcakes, so I tend to get a lot of people that help if I ask. So like Paul mentioned, when we started, I was just given a list of paintings and said, here, do something. They have to do with books. So we went through and we had to find out first where all the books were actually published, well, where the illustrations from the paintings were published in short stories or books or magazines. So poor Laurel, she spent like 4 hours one day and she didn't even find one. But we managed to find the 10 that were in the exhibit. And once that list was complete, we had to kind of go through our collection and evaluate what we had. And that sounds a lot easier than what it was. But for example, this painting of Bess and Venters is in Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. Really famous story by Zane Grey, but it's only in one edition. And it happened to be the one edition we didn't have. So then I had to go find all the books. So once that list was completed, we had to figure out how to fill the rest of the room, because if you've been back there, you see it was only half of the room. So we worked to make lists of other books that the same illustrators did, or other books by some of those same authors. And we identified themes that started popping up, either in the author's works or throughout the illustrations, like the prevalence of horses. So one of the themes that kept occurring related to the connection between books and TV shows. So if you're in there, you'll see the big picture of the, I don't want to call her a half-naked woman, but she's kind of an Amazon compared to the rest of the people. That connects to one of the paintings on the other side. So many of the books or short stories connected to manuscript collections in the AHC. And so we were able to pull in those. So two good examples is the movie The Cattle Queen of Montana was inspired by the Zane Grey book, The Maverick Queen. And this was a twofer for us because we not only have Barbara Stanwyck's papers, which had her copy of the script and annotations and photographs. We also have Tom Blackburn, who wrote the screenplay. So we were able to put two other collections in there. Two other of the cases focused on the influence for Western authors, including like guidebooks and personal memoirs of moving to the West, and also the significance of the Saturday Evening Post magazine. We've continued adding to the exhibit, so even though Paul said it's been open for 2 months, if you haven't been here since the very beginning, there's some new stuff. Our latest addition was the Boone and Crockett Club case, which is the very last case. And it's also perhaps the most significant one to the popular Western genre that all these paintings come from. The edited volumes that Teddy Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell put out as part of the Boone and Crockett Club, they've been pointed by scholars as being one of the inspirations in the creation of the ideas of the American West. So they say every book that's about the American West is seeing its inspiration in those edited volumes. And most of those edited volumes, the Boone and Crockett Club was a group of men. Teddy Roosevelt was one of them before he was president. But they're all men who like to do stuff outdoors and hunt and then write about all the big game they caught or killed. So even though this formula for the genre changed as the years went by, the ideas of hunting in the West and how they were connected endured throughout the popular Western literature genre. Sorry, this microphone's also making that weird noise, it's not me. So illustrators were very instrumental in the book publishing world. And while there were many great illustrators and authors, the circles of relationships that they made were small, and especially in the West, you can find many degrees of separation between illustrator, author, movie script, writer, and even wartime propaganda artists. So scholar Christine Bold, she's the one that talks about the Boone and Crockett Club a lot in her book, but she also describes the similar interconnectedness as tentacles of influence. And these connections can be seen in the way in which Cornwell, who did this painting, was the illustrator of many of Peter Kind's works, and like Owen Wister relied on Frederick Remington to illustrate a lot of his works. So we kept seeing the same names over and over and over again. So in one of the catalogs of Dean Cornwell's works, there's an introduction that has a really good bio of Dean Cornwell. And she wrote that this is a quote, until the mid-1940s, Cornwell illustrated short stories and novels that served the same function as today's television soap operas. Now, this was written in the 2000s, so it might be a little different. We might want to say influencers on TikTok. She goes on to say, quote, "The stories in their illustrations were a major source of escapist entertainment for the American public. These stories featured extravagant emotional experiences, travel to exotic lands, and high adventures." End quote. From these quotes, you can tell, from at least today's perspective, that illustrations were very popular and had a heavy emphasis put on them and their significance in the publishing world. And the publishing world is another way that we saw a lot of interconnectedness, because Peter Kynes and several of the other authors, their stories were published in Cosmopolitan magazine, not the same Cosmo we have today. And then also, if you start looking at the books and where they were also published often in the same year by Cosmopolitan Publishing Company. So there's some kind of a connection going on there. That's actually my next research project. I'm going to go to Oregon and look at his papers, because he has a lot with Cosmopolitan in them. So throughout the 20th century, especially the second half, many of these Western books were adapted into film and TV shows, and it's not uncommon to find names like Zane Grey or Owen Wister mentioned somewhere in the description for most television shows. What was not as common, though, was to see the artist or illustrator's names attached to the movies. But in fact, that was where we found one of our coolest connections. Frank McCarthy, who painted, The Flash Flood, was also known for his work on dozens of movie posters from the Cold War era. While trying to see if we had any crossover from his art to our Hollywood collections, I came across one poster that he had designed for Station 6 Sahara, which is the one in there. It was a 1962 movie starring Carol Baker. We have Carol Baker's papers here. So, as luck would have it, she had saved a photograph taken of a painting McCarthy had done for the movie poster and they used in promotions. So the image that's in there is a scan of a photograph of a painting. You might also recognize McCarthy's art without realizing it if you are a fan of movies, especially the B movies of the 60s. He did some for, just to name a few, he did hundreds of them. Great Escape, PT 109, the 1967 edition of The Dirty Dozen, You Only Live Twice with James Bond, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So, many of these writers and artists, we're going to go back to the early 20th century, were related to the Boone and Crockett Club, even if tangentially, and even the Boone and Crockett Club is related to the TVs because Boone, Davy Crockett. Owen Wister was a member, and so was and Emerson Huff, who did the Madonna of the Plains, was the editor. He wrote the story that went with the picture. Was the editor of Field and Stream, which was one of Grinnell's magazines that he published. And Grinnell and others relied on Frederick Remington for their illustrations of the West. One interesting story, we kind of found out the gossip about all these people with some of them. It's interesting to note that Huff and Remington never became members of the Boone and Crockett Club because Huff was considered not the right social class. And Remington wasn't even invited. But please also note the large display of Remington sketches, his short story, the painting in the ritual room, and the bronze he sculpted, and then the reproduction of bronze right there too. So you have to wonder who we actually still remember. We couldn't always verify if the artists and the authors worked together on these illustrations, but there are acknowledgments here and there about their relationships. Owen Wister, for example, whose papers we have here, writes in his 1893 diary that he was writing short stories, several short stories that would be illustrated by Frederick Remington. He goes on to detail how the stories needed to be, quote, thrilling, dramatic sketches of frontier life and incident, end quote. And one would think that the illustrations would follow as such as well. In the bio of Dean Cornwell, it talks about how she spends time focusing on the illustrations he created for short stories and novels. And although this one at first sounds a tad negative, this quote, it captures the job of the illustrator in their work. And it's, quote, an important difference between the painter of easel pictures and the illustrator is that the former goes through life painting the things that he sees before him, the things that appeal to him, while the latter is forced to paint something that neither he nor anyone else has seen and make it appear as if he had actually been an observer on the spot. The measure of the illustrator is his ability to take a subject in which he may have neither interest nor information, tackle it with everything he's got, and make the finished picture look like the consummation of his life's one ambition, end quote. And that was a quote from Dean Worma. So looking at the other point of view, a little bit more positive one, Alfred Henry Lewis, who did the one magazine that was done with William Dunton, and then he also did the Wolfville stories that are in the other case that Frederick Remington illustrated. He saw Frederick Remington's role as illustrator for his Wolfville series books, as he wrote in the preface to the first book, so he actually put this in the published. He wrote, quote, "He left such matters to the illustrations of Mr. Remington and the imagination of those who read," end quote. This quote explains nicely the last little anecdote related to the exhibit. Okay, you always have some kind of mystery with stuff in our field. This is our big mystery. So we have flash flood painting. So this flash flood painting is published in 1955 on the Cavalier magazine. And if you want to know about funny stories with magazines, we can tell you those too. Because Cavalier turned into like a Playboy type magazine like just a few issues later. Luckily it was not that. So first, W.R. Burnett wrote, okay, you have to stay with me on this. It gets confusing. He wrote an unpublished manuscript that would become the publication in the middle of 1950s Stretch Dawson. But before that was published or even accepted for publication, it was adapted into a screenplay for the 1948 movie Yellow Sky, starring Ann Baxter, whose papers we have. So then the story was then published after it was put in the book and the movie. It was then published in its entirety in the Cavalier magazine with the flash flood cover. The flash flood was supposed to indicate something from the book. And I even OCR'd the book and everything, or the magazine to look for the name. But funny enough, and I watched the movie and then my significant other read the book for me. There's no flash flood in the book at all. I mean, not in any of them. In fact, I'm gonna spoil it. But the movie is all about these guys that come into a town and they're about to die of dehydration because there's no water. So, I really don't know where the flash flood goes with the Stretch Dawson, but that's really the hardest one we had. But we liked the painting so much that we couldn't not have that one. So my last big thank you goes to Naoma Tate for letting us use your pictures and your paintings, and we had a lot of fun with them. So if you want to hear any of the other gossip, just let me know and I can pass it along to you.
I think what we'll do is hold questions until I finish, and then you can ask both or either of us as we go. So this is the painting that's in the exhibit by Harvey Dunn. And what I found interesting is that when I started on this presentation, I realized I was very intimately familiar with the work of Harvey Dunn because my mother grew up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and Harvey Dunn is a South Dakota artist who painted the shall we say, the founding or the European founding of South Dakota. And there were 3 paintings in my house when I was growing up. This one, The Prairie is My Garden. And if you take a look at it, we can sort of, in a quick code, get a sense of how Dunn put together most of his paintings. First, he's going to picture some human beings. They're not necessarily going to be highly active, but they're going to be there and be doing things. Second, he likes plants. There's always going to be luxurious plants. And when I say always, of course there are exceptions, but he likes, and as you see here, everybody has flowers in their hands that they're picking from all the lush spring growth. He likes an active sky, not a boring sky. He's going to have stuff in it, and then often has buildings in it. some sort of square objects. And that gives you a sense of this. The second painting in my household was after school. And it's two children walking away from school on their way to do their chores on the farms. You can see the growth of grass. It's probably late summer, early fall because of the color of the grass. Good figures, blocky building in the back, the school, the other one, of course, the outhouse. And then something for supper. A man in the foreground with a covered wagon, probably on the way out to find the land that they have purchased in order to build their sod house or whatever. So very early depiction, very early in the settling of certainly eastern South Dakota. There's a man there, lush growth, lots of sky stuff going on, and then the sort of building. And then we have the picture in the exhibit, spring planting. It takes you a little while to figure out where the human being is. He's hidden by the big machine in front. We haven't seen machines. There is no growth in the dirt. It's dirt or it's stubble being plowed underneath. The sky, as the sky, is empty, but you've got the birds, so maybe that covers it. And then, of course, the sun, and we've had some debates about whether this is a sunrise or a sunset. Is it the hot part of the day, or is it the cool part of the morning? Or I'm trying to figure that out. But what you see is this machine is coming straight towards you in the audience. It's not a sideways look. It's not walking across. It's not the mother looking at her child. This is a threatening, powerful vehicle coming out of the painting. The human element is almost gone. Very different from what we were seeing. Now, I'm going to ask a simple question. How does the artist have these two approaches? How do we explain what's going on? And I'll just use that question to niggle us through, but let me start with a little bit of biography. Harvey Dunn was born on a homestead in 1884 in eastern South Dakota. His parents actually went out and started breaking sod. He grew up helping his dad not just run the farm, but break new fields by plowing up virgin prairie and creating a farm. His father must have worked him really hard because he grew up into a very large man. He was about a head taller than any other person in any room. Very broad shoulders, very powerful person, just physically. His mother was the one with the artistic talent, and they would sit around, particularly on a summer's night after dinner, with maybe some paper or something to draw on, and she would teach him how to sketch, how to draw with a pencil, and so on. So he began to get some experience with art and think, oh, I might be interested in this, or maybe I have some talent. But remember, he's on an isolated homestead in eastern South Dakota. His dad was, the sort of stereotypical farmer. Of course you will follow in my footsteps, you will inherit the farm, etc., etc. Don't give me this, you don't even need education. Why would you go off and try to be an artist? You can't make a living at it. You can't support yourself. So at age 17, he goes away to college, to South Dakota Agricultural College, where he immediately flunks all of his courses except for the art classes. And his teacher, the person he thinks of as a mentor I'm not going to remember her last name. Anyway, he goes back and visits her until she dies. Very influential woman in his life. She recommends that he go to the Art Institute of Chicago, as in the Art Institute of Chicago, which is still there. He goes, he doesn't quite, he's a farm boy. He doesn't quite understand the academic approach to art that was being taught at the Institute at the time. He did his best to to learn something from it, and but he struggled with it. He wasn't really happy. But despite that, he sticks with it. He still wants to be an artist, and so he winds up applying to the studio of Howard Pyle, who at the time is a very famous illustrator in Delaware. So he's going from South Dakota to Chicago, understandable move, and now he's going to go to Delaware. Pyle accepts him. Pyle is a great teacher, and he's just perfect for whatever personality it is that Harvey Dunn has. And after studying with Pyle for about 2 years, he says, you're ready, go get a job. Go earn your living. So he goes out, he gets himself an apartment away from the school. He has, a portfolio. He starts taking it around to magazines. He's going to be an illustrator. That's how he's going to make his money being an artist. And he goes to magazine and magazine, and they all say, oh, you were really great. When we find something that matches your abilities, we'll give you a call. So it's several weeks, even a couple of months down the road, and nothing has happened. So he takes his portfolio to the Saturday Evening Post, and shows it, and the editor says, "Oh, this is good. We'll call you." And he sort of gets angry, and he says, "Look, I've been hearing this for weeks. Nobody's ever called. Nobody's, just tell me it's not any good if that's really what you think. Otherwise, give me a job." And the guy sort of said, "Well, okay, I hear you. I see your point, but I don't have a job for you right now." A week later, he gets the call. We've got a short story, 2 pages. We need 5 illustrations. It's yours. So that's his first job, sold to the Saturday Evening Post. Not a bad start. 2 years later, he marries a woman by the name of Tula Krebs. They have 2 children. He's supporting them with his illustrations by that point. In 1914, they moved to New Jersey, and in 1919, they moved to Tenafly, New Jersey, where they built a house, and he and his wife live in that house for the rest of their lives. Here's the Saturday Evening Post picture. You can tell that it's a Western, like stagecoach being pulled by mules. Little bit of violence here, man with a gun, just plugged whoever it is that's lying there, and so on. So he's starting off with a reputation as somebody who can illustrate a Western story. And that's quickly where he goes in terms of what they ask him to do. Cowboys, rodeo, the wagon, train boss, there in the middle with you can see the wagon behind them in the valley. So he's getting that kind of a reputation. He's also doing settler kind of photograph, paintings, illustrations. Here you've got, the standard formula. This is like 1908. So this is 2 years after he's started his job, and you've got the lush grass, you've got the human figures, you've got an interesting sky. You got the wagon here, you don't have anything in the background, but you sort of see that approach already. But he's not limited. He has to paint, as Mary Beth said, he has to paint whatever they ask him to. So he can do sea scenes. Here we've got a nice painting of a woman who's trying to stop this sailor from shooting somebody. We get a nice scene here. This is very long. This is a serialized story. He has illustrations in about 5 issues in a row for this story. But it's 2 men on a boat meeting a woman who is clearly dressed like them, dressed like a man. And of course, we've got to have the gun belt. So he's got this sort of reputation for a good story. Sometimes he goes a little bit abroad. So we've got a Mexican scene, lots of figures, not much action, but just enough to make the story work. The one on the left is sort of interesting. It's a northern scene, obviously, probably Alaska. You've got to sort of stop for a moment and look for the human beings. They're way in the back. They aren't very big. The story of the illustration is with the powerful dogs who are pulling the sled towards the viewer as opposed to walking across. And there's not much ground, it's just snow. You know, it's shown by a little bit by the shading and not by much else. And the sky is almost opaque. It's dark, it's cloudy, not much interesting happening in the sky there. And of course he can do other things. Detective novels, struggle of two men on a banister. Obviously one is going to fall shortly. Sometimes he does some stuff that we would not view as PC anymore. But again, he's the illustrator, he's doing what he's told, he's working. These are all in the Saturday Evening Post. We've got a strong slave here carrying wood. We have a couple South Sea Islanders carrying a dead, I don't know, is that an iguana, a Gila monster? I don't know. Or somebody up picking coconuts. Of course, he can do romance. He has to do romance if you're going to illustrate many stories. So you see a woman being carried by her hubby, they're sort of, or lover or whatever. They're staring at each other, walking across a summer, probably early spring prairie with flowers, etc., you know, enjoying each other's. Here we have an uncertain woman who's reaching towards a man. Is she inviting him? Is she imploring him? Are they having an argument? Are they about to embrace? You know, it's unclear. You've got to read the story. Or he could just paint women. This is one of my favorite. We have a young girl here who must be in the swamp or something because there's water and you know, moss hanging off, in a nice sort of thin dress, looking sort of young and vulnerable, and she's got these really heavy boots on her feet that don't quite match the rest of the outfit. Here we have several ladies sitting on a porch, you know, on a summer, having a nice chat over tea. And over here we have a woman, looks a little bit disheveled. There's somebody dying on the bed here. I don't know if it's her husband or relative or what it is, but obviously an unhappy scene. So he's managing a huge variety of different kinds of images. Now what we haven't seen are any kinds of machines. And they're really noticeable by their absence from his paintings. He doesn't do many machines, but he does do some car stuff in his first 10 years of illustrating. This one goes with a story about the joys of the new open road, and wouldn't you like to take your honey for a drive, and why not just put her behind the wheel and have her drive away? And it's sort of that kind of, you know, the new world is coming, soon we're going to have highways. And then we have a car race. You got to stop and pause for a minute and go, wait a minute, are there human beings in this picture? There are, but it takes a little while. But what you really have is this machine coming straight out of the picture at you. And if you look at the other indicators, there's almost nothing here on the ground. And the sky is completely... So on the one hand, I've sort of shown you his style. On the other hand, I've shown you several examples of the exception. So then World War I starts, 1917. And for some reason, this 33-year-old man decides, I want to go join the army. I want to be a painter in the war. And so he gets embedded with the American Expeditionary Forces. He's actually commissioned, he becomes a captain in the AEF, and he's chosen as one of 8 painters to go along and paint the war from inside the experience. Interesting final comment. Those 8 painters finished 700 paintings. He only did 17 to finish. He had lots of unfinished stuff. He had lots of sketches. He assumed that he was going to get some time when he wasn't being shelled or running away from the enemy or whatever to finish the painting. So he had lots of stuff started. But when the war ended, they demobilized everybody almost immediately. There was no slow transition out. So he essentially went from being in the army to having to earn his living. So he went right back to illustrating. He didn't have a real chance to sort of, shall we say, finish a lot of his work. He did posters when he was with the Army. These are both his. You see, again, emphasis on the human figure. Lots of energy, lots of excitement, running towards the enemy, interesting skies, less interesting ground. But this is what he's painting when he's at the front. He's in battle. Very difficult to see, partially because he's playing with light. You know, the trees, the leaves, etc. are filtering the light. You can see the two figures in front. They don't look very heroic. One is injured, is bleeding. And then there's people coming up from the right here. Are they friend? Are they foe? Don't know. Okay, he's just making that painting. He paints injured people, two soldiers carrying a litter, etc. This is an interesting painting. This is the sketch. This is a painting based on the sketch. Here you see three soldiers walking, two dead people right here. And they're walking towards this ridge. And if you look carefully at the ridge, you realize this is a tank. This is a piece of machinery, and this is a tank. You know, he isn't really using them, they're just there. You know, are they broken, are they moving? You can't really tell, they're just there. They're part of the sketch. He could have left them, since it became a painting, he could have left them out, he didn't. You know, he doesn't like the machinery. It's there, but he doesn't want to use it. And then he gets demobilized in 1919. 3 years later, he paints this painting. And we think, okay, where does this fit in what he's been painting up until now? And again, what I see is this machine coming out towards the audience. Something different from most of what he does, but very similar to other machines. But let's just do a couple of quick comparisons. This one has lush plant growth, human beings, color, interesting sky, no lush plant growth, sort of a human being, very different kind of a sky. I sit here and wonder, is this in the heat of the day? You know, is this I mean, except the sun is low, so is it the heat of the end of the day? I don't know. Or compare it to this, where the car comes roaring out. There's clearly speed in that. There's no speed here, but the machine is powerfully coming towards you. The sky has, you know, a little bit of stuff, but it's not really defined. The ground is poorly defined, and the humans are almost non-existent. So it's almost as if this racing car is, and somehow the way he put the racing car together is an influence for this big, heavy, slow tractor, which probably can't do more than about 5 miles an hour down the field. So that's where I see this. So if this is where this painting comes from, where in the world does all those prairie pictures come from? So these are at the end of Doug's life, for starters. So in the mid-1920s, so after the planting picture, the spring planting picture is done, he's invited to go out to South Dakota by the editors of one newspaper. It's a cold call letter. Okay, he just sends it off saying, hey, why don't you come out for the Kingsbury County Old Settlers Celebration? He thought, I haven't been home for a while, why not? So he goes out and he participates and he has a good time, and he's not really a celebrity, he's just a local guy who's sort of come home and is enjoying the stuff around his old haunts. And he starts doing that every summer. And we start getting indications in the scholarship that he's talking to people in about 1934, 1935, that maybe he got to do some prairie pictures. That would be an interesting project. And then we don't hear much about it. There's a few pictures that show up in illustrations because they fit the job of the story. But by 1950, He's done more than 40 pictures that are loosely called prairie pictures, that somehow depict early South Dakota, early settlement in South Dakota, and he decides to do an exhibit. So here's an illustrator. He's never done an exhibit. His stuff is known by, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, but he's never had an exhibit. And what he has to exhibit are these prairie pictures. So he picks DeSmet, South Dakota, the Masonic Temple in this small town, which is about 40 miles. I don't know how many of you know where Brookings is. I got at least 2 people saying yes. 3, okay. You know, it's 40 miles west of Brookings on the narrow, on the not major highway, okay? So he does this exhibit there. People love it, okay? It's open for several months through the summer. Lots of people from South Dakota come, and a few from around, and everybody thinks it's a great idea. So that was when he was 66. So just a couple more pictures of the things that get classed as the prairie pictures. You know, again, you see this, you know, you see all the figures here, and then the various ways of dealing with the sky and the land and the life. So after the show was over, fall of 1950, all these pictures are not in New Jersey, they are in South Dakota. And if you've ever thought about how you transport pictures around, it's not straightforward. You know, they can get damaged really easy, etc. So several people talked to him about donating them. And the group that comes out on top is South Dakota State University in Brookings. And so he donates them to the university. He passes away just 2 years later at age 68. And ultimately, they become the foundation of what is now known as the South Dakota State Museum, State Art Museum. And they've got a Dunton gallery where they always have some of his paintings hanging. And it's South Dakota and the South Dakota State University that really have been promoting Dunn equals the prairie pictures, and has done a wonderful job accomplishing that message. However, back in New York and New Jersey, the illustrators love him for his illustrations. They may not even know about the prairie paintings, but he gets all these awards. He's elected to the National Academy of Design. He becomes a member of the National Academy of Arts, and he serves as the president of the Society of Illustrators in New York, later elected to their Hall of Fame, and ultimately he's named Distinguished Educator in the Arts. Both of those last 2 are posthumous awards. So the illustrators know him, South Dakota knows him, and in many ways, this painting that's here in the exhibit really shows that both of those sides. This is an illustration. The painting that you see was painted for the illustration on the cover, but he brought his painterly skills to it and really made something out of it. And that sort of fits what he always taught his students, was that you are an artist first, and then, if you're lucky, you can become an illustrator. But if you're not an artist, forget it. Really had that kind of a notion that, yes, he may earn his living as an illustrator, but art is, and being an artist is what's important. So, thank you very much. So, let me ask, are there any questions for me or for Dr. Brown? Or do you want to, oh, go ahead. Patrick.
Did he do anything that wasn't somber or sad or dispiriting? It seems as though we can almost place him in the depression, even though it's not all that period.
That looks happy. These look happy, at least this one, the one on the left looks happy to me. These guys are smiling. I happen to like the lower left one. Yeah, there's a lot of happy stuff. It just happens to be what the story he was illustrated and what I could find pictures of to share. That's really the choices I make. Anyone else want to? Go ahead.
What distinguishes his illustrations from his paintings?
Nothing, because they're all paintings.
Right.
It's really the jar. As Mary Beth was saying, I don't remember what you were saying in the last couple minutes of your talk, but you gave a nice definition of an illustrator.
Where they make the images, putting like the images on the paper for the reader to understand, and also to help the reader build a picture in their heads what's going on.
But the notion that they have to figure out.
Yeah, the illustrator has to figure out what the writer was talking about in some instances.
Before television.
Before social media.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about it for a minute, we know what elephants are looked like. You know, we've known for 2 centuries what elephants look like. And the reason we know is because of illustrators. And mostly they got it right. Sometimes there's some funny looking elephants out there. But a lot of the things that we know that are foreign to us come from the illustrators who persuaded us that they knew what they were drawing and therefore they drew it. And that's really what it is. As opposed to, so I've studied several illustrators, not that I'm an art expert at all, don't let me fool you. More recent ones work from photographs, or they work from models. What Dunton is doing is he's largely working from up here. You know, he's really making stuff up without seeing it in front of him. Remington would try to be authentic by having, if you look at Remington's studio up at the Buffalo Bill Center in the West, at the Land Museum there, you'll see that he has, you know, he's got a wardrobe. He has some spears and some bows and arrows and a you know, a few different Indian feather bonnets of different kinds and so on. So yes, he can work for models, but for whatever reason, Dunton is really just making it up. He's coming up with an image from his research, from wherever, and painting from imagination.
I'm just going to say one thing about the paintings I've tried to collect, and it is you see the story from the eyes of the illustrator, and that's why these men were so incredible. We had at one time in the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody, the Koerner, there were quite a few Koerner paintings in that exhibit, but we had the artist's studio, and we still have quite a few of the pieces, hopefully bring them up again for people to see in the next few years. But they had all sorts of, you know, costumes and let's say if you're going to draw a horse, saddles and spurs and all sorts of things that that you'd use just like you would be setting up a movie set for these. And that's one of the most incredible things that these illustrations seem to do for me is they, in the mind of these artists, they can put a whole story together. And storytelling, I think, is one of the most important things that one generation can do for another, is be able to make things come alive. And it was tremendously difficult when you didn't have television or movies or your little telephone that you could put everything on YouTube. You had to have an imagination. And I like to think of times when imaginations were what told the story. Think of times when only the sounds that you heard, this is another thing that I like to think about, were the sounds that were actually around you. You had no concept of what something was going to sound like in New York City, or what an orchestra was going to sound like when somebody brought an orchestra to your town and you could hear it. That's all new things. And our lives are so different. So the reason I get so excited about the illustrations and decorative arts and all sorts of things, or I like to think of how human beings in the past reacted to things that we have no idea about. And that's why I love those illustrations. So thank you for explaining everything so beautifully and boldly.
And one other thing, some of the paintings didn't actually make it into the book. And that was another one of our mysteries we had to kind of try to solve, but we had no idea why. But the Cornwell Enchanted Hill painting in the exhibit, it's not in the book. And it's not in any of the other editions either. So it's a gorgeous painting, but we just couldn't quite figure out why it didn't make it into the book.
I have a little bit of an explanation. When you go in, there's an Ed Mill painting. And this Ed Mill painting is of, well, he did it for a liquor company, New West, I think it is.
High West.
High West. And so he took two paintings to High West. One has a saguaro cactus, the other's just the, oh, I shouldn't say just, the other is a cowboy in front of the horse. The other one has a campfire too. But so they chose one and didn't choose the other. So my idea is probably that Cornwell had quite a few paintings that he'd done for the illustrator, and that was one that wasn't picked out for the story. And I think, well, it's one of my favorite paintings that I have, so. Anyway, nobody gets to see it but all of you and me.
So just remember, if you ever do that for somebody, write down why you didn't use that one.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Patrick.
Are you suggesting that in some instances, the illustrator did not read the story, did not read the novel, just had a general idea of what the publisher or the writer wanted? Because in that one case of the cowboy trying to outrun the flood, obviously, and I've seen paperback books in which I've seen the cover and had nothing to do with what was inside either. Just that's what grabs your attention and you buy it.
Yeah.
I think it kind of ran the gamut where some people knew, and the ones that I was trying to show that the ones that worked together a lot would have known, like Owen Wister and Frederick Remington and Dean Cornwell and Peter Kine. They worked together for almost every book, so you would think they probably either had a really good idea of what was coming in the book, or they did get to see it. Sorry.
What about Dunn, as far as you know?
My sense is that Dunn was fairly faithful. He tried to figure out what he was giving. And he did better, he knew the West better than a lot of people in New Jersey and New York, so it was easier for him to research those areas and to recall elements of his growing up. And then things like, the South Sea Island slaves, he didn't have a clue. And, tried to figure it out. Whether the story helped, I don't know. I didn't read the story. We did an interesting project with Cardiff University with their English department on book illustrations. And one of the sort of problems that you run into when you study book illustrations is that books are, as they get published over and over and over again, they drop the illustrations. So you just have the text. So if you have an edition of the book that is written with illustrations, those disappear, and then somebody will go, if they want to study the illustrations, they'll go and collect the illustrations by cutting them out of the pages, and pasting them in a scrapbook or something. And so they don't have the context either. There's a collection of Dunn paintings on Art Store, and 500 of them are from, I'm not going to remember the name of the collection, but they're at a university collection archive somewhere. And they were somebody's collection who then donated the whole thing to the university. And they are literally cut out of pages. Sometimes halfway through the title of the story, they just cut it. And so I look at it and I go, okay, what story was this? What date? you know, as a historian, I want to know the date. You know, what's the time period for this? He doesn't have it, because they were interested just in the illustration and not in the context.
And don't ask ChatGPT to help. It flat out lied, unlike all of the ones I tried it on.
Okay. All right, one more question.
What medium did he work in?
Done. He worked, he does sketches, so his war stuff is charcoal with some paint. His work in Tenafly is everything from, I would say, pen and ink and pencil to paint. So these are clearly painted. You know, where you see more color, they're very painted. He actually experimented with different ways. As an art artist, I will use this term, sorry, Shelby. He found different ways of sort of smashing the paint onto the canvas, and he tried different techniques of swirling, you know, with the brush. And if you look carefully at some of these, you know, you'll see the different ways of trying to make, you know, ragged edges for the wave, because waves always have ragged edges because the water comes off them, and so on. So he did a lot of experimenting. So not, you know, he's got a lot of techniques. He didn't stick with just one. Okay, I have one more thing. Naoma, can I ask you to come on?
Yes.
Naoma, we are very grateful for the gift you gave us of the loan of your paintings in order that we could do this exhibit. We would like to give you a gift in return. Naoma is connected with the Union Pacific, and one of the things that I've noticed during my friendship with her is that if suddenly a train picture shows up or something, she gets interested and excited. And she's also interested in trucks. So we have in one of our railroad collection a picture of the front and the back of a Union Pacific train with the Union Pacific truck driving over the byway on top of it. This is from the James Ehrenberg collection, and we wanted to donate this to you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thank you to Paul and to Carolina for the wonderful relationship I have with both of them and the Buffalo Bill Center in the West. My husband, and the reason I'm able to do anything is my husband's hard work. He passed away about 20 years ago after he sold his truck line. He started out with two little trucks going from Tooele to Salt Lake City. He sold his truck line to Union Pacific. So every time I see a truck running down the highway or a Union Pacific train going by, I say thank you. So thank you.
Get a picture?
Get some more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate your attention and your interest, and I hope you learned something interesting tonight.